Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. K, and I'm currently on a trip to the WPT in Montreal, where I played a $350 mystery bounty the other day. This day two was on Sunday, 2 days ago. And I wound up in a really interesting spot that I decided to analyze more in detail after the fact and run a simulation. So we are at the beginning of day two. It's about 1 to 2 orbits into the day. I had come into the day as 10th in chips out of about 163 returning players. However, a few hands before this one, I lost a lot of my chips in a cooler situation versus the second big stack at the table. So when we start this hand, I have about 12 big blinds, and I only cover one player at the table. The first thing that's important to figure out when you're playing a mystery bounty is what is the average bounty worth? Because in a mystery bounty, the bounty prizes are awarded at random and have varying amounts. In this tournament, the minimum bounty was $200 and the top bounty was $25,000. And there were in between, there were bounties for 10,000, 5,000, 1,000, 500, 400, 300, and 200. So the average of these bounties was $1,500. And that's like sort of the expected value of winning each bounty, even though the amount that you can win could be more or less than that amount. So at this point, we're just in the money in the regular prize pool. The ladders are far away, and the increase in the next ladder in the regular prize pool is only going to be about $25. In this tournament, it was a $350 buy-in with $55 going to rake and $110 going into the regular prize pool and $175 going into the bounty prize pool. So what this tells us right away is that this is a 61% mystery bounty. That means that 61% of the prize pool is in the bounties. So it's more than 50%, which is somewhat uncommon. So this means that a significant amount of the money that's in the prize pool for this event is actually in the bounties, which makes going after the bounties when you are, especially when you're at the start of day two, even more important, because the bounty value so significantly outweighs the value of laddering when there's still, 150 players left. So it's really important in these situations to be going after a bounty. So in this case, I was paying close attention to the one stack that I covered because I knew that theoretically my play should be to get it in very wide versus this short stack that I cover, because the value of busting that player is so much greater than trying to double up via other players who are going to have a huge equity drop because of the bounty on my head because I'm so short as well. So I'm going to talk about some things and I'll explain my thinking in game. But one of the things to keep in mind, if you are interested in this and want more details about how I figure all this out and how I came to this approach, what my thinking is in game and how you can do it too, I actually cover all of this in my Bounties Made Easy course, which is available on my website, pokermix.ca. The Bounties Made Easy course has some praise from some really great players in the games. Ape Styles and Thinking Poker, Andrew Brokus, have both seen my work and recommend it. And so you can purchase this course and find out everything you want to know in terms of the theory, approach, and math to bounty tournaments. And I cover all bounty tournaments, standard knockout tournaments, progressive knockout tournaments, and mystery bounties. And so everything that I'm going to do in this video, you can learn how to do yourself in this course. So back to this particular situation. What we're going to do here is look at the stack distribution. So as you can see under the gun, I can put it up here. There's the stacks also will show here if you want to look. but it's nice to use the visualizer. So in this scenario, the big stack is under the gun, and the short stack is right to his left in EP. And I was with 12 big blinds in the cutoff, and the short stack has about half my stack, about 6 big blinds. So in this scenario, you can see that under the gun is actually supposed to open nearly 90%. Why is that? Well, a number of reasons. He covers everybody at the table by a significant amount, actually, which means even under the gun 8-handed, he gets to open almost any 2 cards. And that's because especially he really wants to play for the EP bounty over here, and he really wants to play for my bounty in particular. These 2 bounties are worth a lot. However, in game, he folded. And so this is the first thing that I want to talk about in terms of this situation, which was that everybody at the table, besides the short stack who goes all in and me, played this hand wrong, most likely. Now, there's a chance he really did have one of these bottom of range hands under the gun, but it's just highly unlikely. And what you'll see as we talk about this hand is that every single other player at the table folded when none of them have less than 90% calling range. And in fact, many of them are supposed to be calling any 2 cards. So this was a really great situation because here we are in this bounty tournament where people actually don't know how to adjust properly for the bounties at all. The bounties were worth so much in this situation. And I had already seen, by the way, that people were playing before, that they were massively overfolding, playing more like it was a regular tournament without taking into account the value of the bounty. And so there's a number of ways that you can take into account the value of the bounty. The way that I prefer to do it, and the way that I teach in my course, is by using formulas to figure out the equity drop associated with a player's bounty, and then converting that into a risk premium associated with them. Now, we're used to talking about ICM risk premiums in terms of deep in a tournament and really high positive risk premiums that tighten up your range. But risk premium is just simply an expression of the value of your stack if it decreases by the amount that you put into the pot, divided by the value of your stack when it increases by the number of chips that you would win. But what happens in a bounty tournament is that you also add the actual dollar value of the bounty to the denominator in the equation. And what you wind up with is negative risk premiums, which basically allow you to call much wider because you don't need as much equity to call because the value of the bounty is so high. And that's what you're going to see in this situation. So under the gun, he was supposed to basically almost never folded. And now we have in EP, the short stack player goes all in for 6 big blinds. And so now here's where I'm going to show you again how much everybody else at this table was overfolding. So after EP goes all in, what does MP, who is with 50 big blinds and who covers all the rest of the players at the table as well, now that the under the gun player has folded, what are they supposed to do? They're supposed to call almost 100%. They fold 7 deuce offsuit and 3 deuce offsuit. But what did they do in game? They folded. Now it goes to hijack. What are they supposed to do? They've got 36 big blinds and they don't cover everybody at the table, but they almost cover everybody. A button has them slightly covered. What are they supposed to do? Well, actually, they're supposed to flat 100%. I gave them this small folding range at the bottom because otherwise the solver won't run the rest of the tree, because basically the actions that are basically, since they're never supposed to fold, if I don't give them a folding range, then we can't look at my range when they do fold, which they did in game. So we can be certain that the hijack player overfolded because they were supposed to flat 100%. Why were they supposed to flat and not rejam? A couple of reasons. First is I'm right next to act behind them, and my bounty is quite valuable too. How valuable are these bounties? Well, I was estimating that the EP's 6 big blind jam was worth about minus 30%. And I figure that my bounty would be worth less than that, but probably at least minus 20, minus 25%. So we can look at our bubble factors and see if I was right. And so what we can see here is that for hijack versus EP, and this is actually, you can see it's true for all of us, this EP jam is worth minus 34%. What does minus 34% mean? That means that you would subtract 34% or 34.5% from the equity you would need to call in a normal chip EV spot versus the 6 big blind stack. Now, normally, in order to call the 6 big blind stack, we would need somewhere around 40% equity to call. Well, in this situation, every single player at the table would now only need 40 minus 34.5%, 34%. So that means every single player at the table only needs 6% equity to call. Now, this is a little bit more complicated by the fact that we have players to act behind us. So that does limit the amount. We can't just call any 2 cards, all of us. I can't call any 2 cards once they fold to me. We'll see my range in a second. But it's pretty damn close, even with players to act that cover us behind. And that's just because this bounty is so, remember, it's worth $1,500. The min cash is worth $300. The ladder is worth $25. This bounty is so valuable. Most of the prize pool is in the bounties. And so you have to be playing a really aggressive strategy in that respect. So one reason they flat their range is because they want to incentivize me to come along too, because my bounty is so valuable, as well as the big blinds bounty is pretty valuable. You can see for hijack, the big blinds bounty is worth minus 20%. So the big blind, except for placing, potential clash with the button, the hijack, sorry, except for the potential clash with the button, is really looking at fairly huge equity drops versus all of the remaining players behind them. And that's why they don't want to re-raise, is because they're not sad to get it in a multi-way pot versus these players who all have really juicy bounties. The other reason why they flat rather than rejam is because the button covers them. They don't really want to be in a position where they jam 6 deuce off and then the button wakes up with a hand and calls and busts them. This stack is worth a lot, and it matters that they have, this the average stack at this point was around 31 big blinds. So these players have above an average stack. They don't want to lose all their chips on a weak hand. So what they're going to do is flat their entire range. They're supposed to flat 100%. And then if the button rejam, they would have some folds at the bottom of the range. But otherwise, they're probably going to be pretty happy to get it in with most of the players behind them because they cover and the bounties are worth so much. So rather than calling, which they were supposed to do with any 2 cards, they folded also. And now it's on me in the cutoff. And actually, before we do this, you can sort of cheat along here. But so I want to talk about what my thought process was in game. So as I said, I was thinking the EP's bounty is probably worth somewhere around minus 30%. I know it's extremely valuable. The other things that I'm thinking are, I've got 12 big blinds. I've got like slightly above 1/3 of an average stack. Even doubling up versus players who cover me doesn't get me, it won't even get me to an average stack. And on top of that, they're going to be incentivized to call me very widely because I'm so short and my bounty is so valuable. So I'm not in a really good spot as the second short stack at this table. And the best value opportunity I have is to get it all in with this player and potentially win their bounty. So knowing that their bounty is extremely valuable because of the math work that I've done around mystery bounties, it turns out it was worth minus 34%. So I was even on the conservative side. And also thinking about the fact that this is my best opportunity to win more money in this tournament. Because even if I squeak up another ladder or something, it's only going to be about 25 bucks. The potential to win this bounty, which has an average equity of $1,500, but even the potential to actually win $25,000 because the big bounty was still in play. It's, to me, a no-brainer, actually, to be getting it all in here. But I was thinking, well, but every stack behind me does cover. My bounty is also worth a lot. As we saw, mine was worth about minus 25% to the other players. So even if I go all in, they're actually still really heavily incentivized to call extremely wide versus both of us, something which you would never really see in a regular tournament because the ranges will get so much tighter once you have an all in front of you, even when both the all-ins are fairly short. So I was thinking, well, before I looked down at my cards, I was thinking, well, I'll probably jam like at least 60% of hands. Like I'm gonna go very, very wide in this spot, but I don't think I can go any two. Well, I was actually even too conservative, actually. This is supposed to be my strategy. I'm supposed to basically rejam almost any two cards. I fold the very, very bottom, very, very bottom combos. Even 9-3 offsuit is a jam. 10 deuce offsuit, we're just rejamming it. 6-3 offsuit, putting it in with 12 blinds. 4D suited, putting it in with 12 big blinds. This is a representation that tells you, what does minus 34% mean? How does this change our range? Well, let's take a look, and we can see this here with all the other players too. So under the gun was supposed to call to raise to open 90%. Well, with the no bounty involved, they're supposed to open only 17%. EP, when with the 6 big blinds, is supposed to jam 30% in a non-bounty tournament. In the bounty tournament, they're jamming 50%. After they jam, when it folds to me in a non-bounty tournament, I only VPIP about 13%. This is my range, very, very tight range. King 8 offsuit, which is what I had in this hand, is not anywhere near being close to getting it in with this player. But the 13% in a non-bounty tournament turns into 90%, over 90% in bounty tournament. So while I would have folded a bunch of this in game, being worried about the players overcalling me, but actually I was also thinking, like, you know what, I really think that these players, if I rejam here, are going to overfold because they've already been overfolding, and we could see from the action from the other players at the table who were supposed to call with any two cards and didn't, that overfolding was sort of the theme of the day. So when I saw King 8, which isn't a great hand, I read it as more than good enough to get it all in, and in fact would probably get a number of folds, possibly even from hands that dominated me. And so that makes jamming this range even better. Probably if I'd known luck to give them folds behind me, that we would be rejamming any two cards. I didn't get that. I was going to jam like 60%, which is still a fairly wide range. But luckily I didn't have one of these bottom cards to to contemplate. I saw King 8 and I immediately went all in. And yes, it turns out that my thinking was actually too conservative in this spot. I should have been going wider than I even intended to do. So here's some more interesting stuff. So what happens after the short stack with 6 big blinds go all in, and I go all in with the 12 big blinds? What are the players behind me supposed to do? They've got 38 big blinds, about 35, about 20, the players behind me. What should they be doing? They should be calling really wide. Take a look at this. Again, I had to node lock these ranges because actually button is supposed to rejam 100%. 100%. 100% of hands. Our bounties are too valuable, and you get a chance to win too. And button now covers all the remaining players behind. So button gets to be very aggressive and gets to claim our bounties by going all in, because once button goes all in, it now becomes rather unprofitable for the blinds to call very much at all. They have to play a lot tighter because the button covers them and they will be eliminated from the tournament. The button gets to go all in because they cover the other players, and even if they get in way behind, the value of these bounties is so huge that they still get to do that. The button for the small blind is going to be only slightly less than 10% probably. And what was it? We look at buttons. So button versus small blind, 13%. So and versus the big blind, it's 20%. So these bounties are still really juicy for the button, which is why they can just jam any two cards. But I had to node lock this because they folded. What's small blind supposed to do when button folds? Same thing. I also had to node lock a small folding range in order to be able to see the big blind strategy after this, because after button folds, small blind is supposed to go in all in with any two cards. But as the theme of the day was, they folded as well. What's big blind supposed to do when small blind folds? Well, they're supposed to call almost any two. They fold 3 deuce off. So even though big blind has 20 big blinds, is going to be extremely short if they lose this pot, the thing that I'm trying to hammer home is these bounties are so valuable that it doesn't matter. They should be calling off with any two cards, hoping to get one or both of our bounties. And the value of the bounties is so huge that it makes calling off with 7 deuce off that profitable. So what would it be in a regular tournament if this happened? So I rejam, and what does button do? They VPIP 7%. What does small blind do? VPIPs 8%. Big blind, VPIPs 8%. Right? So this is an extreme difference in terms of play that I believe most of the players at my table were playing more this non-bounty strategy because they all folded in this hand when every single one of them basically should have been in the pot with almost any two cards. So this gives me even more equity in this spot. So the solver gave me this strategy, even knowing that every single player behind me is supposed to call 100%. Well, when they overfold, that even adds even more equity to this spot. So this hand was my favorite hand of the tournament, and where I felt like my skill edge shone the most, because I believe that everybody else at this table would have folded the King 8 offsuit if they had been in my shoes. Whereas I went all in, I got the rest of them to fold. I got to go heads up with this really valuable bounty. Turned out, so give the results, turned out that the EP player had Jack 10 offsuit, so I was actually ahead with the King 8 offsuit, about a 60-40 to win. And the board ran out with neither of us getting a pair, and I won the pot and I won the bounty with King high. And so then what did I remember? I said that my EV in the spot to win the bounty is $1,500. That's the average dollar value of the bounty. What did I win? Well, I went up to draw the bounty for this hand and I pulled the $5,000 bounty. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I thought this was a really fascinating spot that demonstrates both how much you need to adjust when you're playing bounty tournaments, especially in tournaments where you're in a spot where the bounty is worth a lot of equity and also dollar value, potentially, as well as the huge edges that understanding how to play these bounty tournaments can give us. Because I won $5,000 here in the spot when likely every other single player at this table would not have even taken the spot and given themselves the opportunity to win this bounty. I wound up busting about a half an hour later. I never did get a double up. I sort of nursed the short stack for a while. I didn't get another chance to go after any bounties because I was the shortest stacks at the table. And that's why it was so important that I took this spot. This was almost my entire winnings for this tournament. I wound up finishing 104th for 58.25. I had won a second bounty in the first orbit of the tournament that was for $500. And the 325 was my in the money regular prize pool cash. So the entire value that I got from this tournament was in this one hand. And it was such a crucial spot that made the difference between this being a series where I was starting off with like a moderate win to actually almost covering all my buy-ins and free rolling the entire tournament series because of this one hand. If you enjoyed this video and you found it useful, I hope you'll consider purchasing my course or booking a coaching session with me to learn more about bounties. You can find me at pokermix.ca or on Twitter at Dr. Kamikaze. And also there's the PokerMix Twitter account, which is the PokerMix. Thanks a lot and hope to see you again.